if I told you that in 2025, we were getting a brand new Nintendo 64? Well, you don't have to hold your breath because that's exactly what is happening. The company Analogue, who is known for their really high-end retro consoles like the Analogue Duo, which is a TurboGrafx and TurboGrafx Duo, and more recently, the Analogue Pocket, which plays Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, TurboGrafx, Game Gear, Atari Lynx, and Neo Geo Pocket Color cartridges. That's a mouthful. Has announced the Analogue 3D. And in this video, we're gonna take a look at that announcement, read through the press release and tech specs, and check out some images because some of the claims that are being made on this new console are kind of wild and out there. And I'm really excited to see if they can deliver. Let's pull it up and see exactly what they're saying here. Okay, first off, Analogue announced that they were working on this thing. God, I want to say it was back last year. I had made a video post about it because it was a project I knew they were working on, and I was really, really excited. The N64, probably one of my favorite video game consoles of all time. And games like these pretty much defined my teenage years. And I want to get something out there right out of the gate. I have no affiliation with Analogue. I do have all of their products because I truly love what they put out, but I have never actually spoken with anybody at that company. I've tried, but I've never gotten a response. So what you're hearing here is purely my unbiased opinion, or biased because I love video games so much. Take it as you will. Now here's their little pitch sheet. Introducing the Analogue 3D. The future is here. A reimagining of the N64 in 4K resolution, 10 times the resolution of the original N64. The first and perhaps greatest multiplayer system of all time. Analogue 3D is 100% compatible with every original N64 game ever made. Region-free, Bluetooth LE, dual-band Wi-Fi, 4 original-style controller ports, entirely new next-generation analog hardware featuring 3D OS, engineered entirely in FPGA. No emulation. This is something that's really important here. No emulation. We're gonna get to that here in just a few minutes. This is a console that plays Nintendo 64 cartridges. If you're familiar with Analogue's other products, that's sort of their thing. It's new hardware running old games, okay? And while they are open source, these machines are not designed to be emulators. 100% compatibility for the first time ever. Analogue 3D represents a milestone in video game preservation. It's really important. It's not only the world's first reimagining of the Nintendo 64, but the world's first 100% compatible recreation of an N64. Analogue spent nearly 4 years engineering it in FPGA. No more incompatibilities found in software emulation like input lag, graphic, audio, inaccuracies, timing, frame rate issues, and more. For the first time, you can re-experience the Nintendo 64 exactly as it was meant to be without compromise. There's a lot of stuff to unpack there. But this is the part here that I don't want to say that I'm skeptical of. I would say that I am cautiously optimistic. Now, all this is taken right off their website. So if you want to go read all of this stuff, you totally can. But this segment here is really what sparks my interest. The unmistakable signature and soul of a CRT on your HD TV in 4K. So if you're too young to remember, that would be a TV like this. Glass front, huge back, fairly heavy. But stuff like this is what these consoles, like the N64 and everything prior to that, were designed to be played on. Keep that in mind while reading this next piece. Unlike its 2D predecessors, the N64 wasn't just about pixels. The original hardware's distinctive approach to rendering polygons and textures depend on the CRT far more critically than simpler 2D systems. Every game developer had to leverage the interplay between the hardware and the CRT to achieve harmony. While very few modern upscalers have transformed the 2D era of video games with pixel-perfect clarity, I would argue that none of them have, the N64 demands something far more radical: the unmistakable essence of a CRT. So, I mean, they're kind of flat out saying in this here that the N64 relies on a CRT television, but their whole pitch is you don't need a CRT, you can play this on your HD TV. Analogue 3D brings true CRT reference quality to your HD TV in 4K. Experience the N64 with unmatched authenticity and zero lag. It's the N64 reborn. Analogue 3D's original display modes are meticulously reproduced, visually indistinguishable recreations of CRT displays, capturing the warmth, depth, and texture in every frame. The soft glow of phosphor and vibrant colors unite with immersive scan lines and shadow masks. This isn't just upscaling. I feel like that's a really bold statement. I personally have never seen anything that is able to recreate something flawlessly on a brand new, say, OLED display in 4K that looks like a CRT. I've seen lots of things emulate it. I've seen nothing do it perfectly. Which is why you see companies like Mod Retro creating products like the Chromatic. They're not even attempting it. What they've done is they have completely reproduced the original Game Boy Color display. It's like 166 by 144 pixels. So on stuff like this, which is actually very rare, you don't have to worry about any sort of upscaling or how authentic it is, because that's actually the resolution of this display. But that's a lot easier done on a handheld because there's a display on every handheld. If you're doing a console like this, you can't be sure that everybody's just gonna be lugging around a CRT. So I feel like if done correctly, this really could be revolutionary. Now this is another thing that I think is really interesting. They say the gold standard of multiplayer. N64 is perhaps the greatest multiplayer gaming system of all time. Around 70% of the game's library supports multiplayer. That's a statistic that I didn't even know. It's interesting. It isn't just opinion, it's the heart of the experience. When multiplayer was a bridge that connected us in a simple way, in-person multiplayer creates experiences that aren't just better together, it creates experiences that are only possible together. Analogue 3D is a revival of the very essence of multiplayer, brought back to life with the soul of the N64 at its core. I do have to say their marketing is really good on this. Okay, introducing 3DOS. 3DOS is an evolution of Analogue OS. Analogue OS is what runs on stuff like the Analogue Pocket and the Analogue Duo. Its distinctive operating system for playing and experiencing an entire era of video games, redesigned in 4K exclusively for the Analogue 3D, loaded with features uniquely crafted for the N64, developed for everyone who understands that the details define the experience. 3DOS sets the standard for exploring the depths of the N64. It's nothing incredibly flashy. It actually looks very similar to Analogue OS that I've already been playing with on the Analogue Pocket. Okay, so if you're wondering about the hardware inside of this, here's a little piece of that. We're preserving video game history with FPGA hardware. Analogue 3D was developed to achieve unparalleled compatibility, engineered directly into a 220K LE Ultra Cyclone 10GX. that goes over most of our heads. The most powerful FPGA analog has ever used in a product. We spent 4 years developing a perfect way to experience the N64 in FPGA for absolute accuracy. N64 is infamous for its difficulties within software emulation. That is very true. I personally have never experienced a perfect N64 emulator, and I have N64 emulators on just about every device I own. Some are better than others. None of them are anywhere near perfect. 100% compatibility has never been achieved until now. That's an interesting statement. Yes, 100% compatibility has never been achieved on an emulation because it's an emulator and nothing's ever 100%. But what they're talking about here is actual hardware. So yeah, it doesn't seem outrageous for there to be 100% compatibility. Analogue 3D is designed to preserve video game history with the respect it deserves. I really, really appreciate statements like this. If you watch my videos, you know I'm huge into preservation. You don't have to watch just look around me. I mean, I'm all about preserving this stuff. And now onto the tech specs of this machine here. I'm actually looking at like a full image for the first time, and this is answering a question that I actually had, and that is, what about peripherals like the N64 disk drive? Will we be able to play our N64 disk drive games? I'm looking at the bottom of this thing now, and it looks like the answer is no, because you need that serial port on the bottom of your N64 to play that. But that's fine because very few people have an N64 disk drive. Okay, compatibility, all original N64 game cartridges, all original cartridges and accessories. I'm assuming they must mean North American accessories because obviously this disk drive is not going to work. And it is region free. So if you want to play your Japanese games on the Analogue 3D, looks like you can do so. Video specs, 4K HDMI output, so it is HDMI, NTSC and PAL support, lag-free and zero signal degradation, original display modes, CRT and PVM models, and a variable refresh rate. They also are advertising this controller here made by 8BitDo. I do like 8BitDo stuff. This is their redesigned Nintendo 64 controller. It's sold separately for $39.99. Honestly, there are 4 controller ports on the front of this machine. If you're gonna play it authentically, I highly suggest playing it with an original N64 controller. Because while I do appreciate 8BitDo and I think their products are great, there is nothing like playing these games on an N64 controller. One of the most unique things about the Nintendo 64 was their controller. The 3 horns, man. You're not getting that with the 8BitDo controller. So the console doesn't come with any controllers whatsoever. So you're gonna have to have some of these or be willing to buy some of the 8BitDo stuff in order to play it. And it does look like this 8BitDo controller is nice. It's Bluetooth, so it's compatible with Switch and Windows, Android, and iOS. It does have vibration support, and it does have a Hall effect thumbstick. One of the things that really sucked about the N64 controllers was that thumbstick. That thumbstick was terrible. But if you're interested in upgrading this thumbstick in preparation for your new N64 to a Hall effect, 8BitDo does offer that, and Dr. Mod and I just changed one out, and I think they're pretty nice. You should check out the newest episode of Dr. Mod's Lab where we do that. So what about stuff like the expansion pack and the memory pack? Will you be able to save your games, or do you need original memory packs? Well, built-in expansion pack, so you won't have to worry about that. That should have been obvious. It does have a built-in memory pack as well, so it doesn't look like you're gonna need an original N64 memory card to save your games. It also has 3D OS, which we already talked about. It has dual band Wi-Fi and OTA wireless 3D OS. What is the Wi-Fi for? My guess is the Wi-Fi is for just system updating. That's probably all that it's for. I don't think you're going to be able to wirelessly play with other people. The point of this thing is to get everybody in a living room together and play. Classic Bluetooth and LE support, so controllers. 4-player support, wireless and wired. It has all the original ports in the front. It has 2 USB-A ports, charging and wired support. That's what it's stating it's for. It's not for other things, it looks like. An SD card slot, including a 16 gigabyte SD card. What does that mean? We're gonna get to that in just a second. I know what you're thinking, but it's not what you're thinking. And the console is powered via USB-C input. Dimensions are 180 millimeters by 230 millimeters, and it weighs 837 grams, which is about the same as an original N64. What do you get in the box when you buy it? You get the Analogue 3D console, you get the 16 gig SD card. It does designate it's pre-installed for a reason, you'll see. You get an HDMI cable, you get a USB cable, and you get a USB-C power brick. And if you're curious about audio, it does run in 48 and 16-bit PCM audio. Now, the most important question, when can you get it? How much is this thing going to cost? Pre-orders start on October 21st. We're gonna talk about pre-orders in a second though. The cost of this new machine is $249.99. So it's 250 bucks. I personally think for all the R&D that went into this and what you were getting, that is more than a fair price. I'm sure people are going to complain about it, and I'm sure people are going to say, to hell with that, I'm just going to stick with my N64. That's totally fine too, but keep in mind, if you want to account for inflation when this thing came out in 96 or whenever it was, this is still coming in cheaper if we're accounting for inflation. So keep that in mind also. Now let's talk about pre-orders for a second. I don't know if you've ever tried to pre-order something from Analogue. Now, over the last 4 years with the pandemic and all that stuff, it's been a little bit different. Analogue doesn't sit on stuff very long. In fact, they don't produce a whole lot of these. I would like to think that they're not doing it for some kind of, creating scarcity or falsified product demand or anything like that. The Analogue stuff is just popular. So my suggestion is, with how much press this is getting and how excited everyone is about this, if you want one, highly suggest getting to their website. When the Analogue Pocket was announced, Wave 1 sold out instantly. I was Wave 1, still didn't get my Analogue Pocket for nearly 12 months. And if you don't believe me about secondhand Analogue products, overly expensive. Don't buy them secondhand, unless it's a super good deal. I did buy the pink Analogue Pocket that my wife uses. I bought that secondhand at a retro convention, but the guy was nice enough to sell it to me for MSRP. So here's the really important stuff that is in little tiny print at the bottom of their website. And this is where things really kind of start to get defined, and there's a lot of clairvoyance on what they're going for with this project. We have 12 bullet points here, and you really ought to pay attention to some of these. Number 1, Analogue 3D plays legacy game cartridges via an original style cartridge slot. Analogue 3D does not play copyrighted ROM files. Let me repeat that. It says right here on their website, Analogue 3D does not play copyrighted ROM files. So if you are an emulation person and that's what you're into, the point of this console isn't to buy it, load up a SD card with all the N64 ROMs, slam it in there, and play all the games off of ROMs or game backups. That's not what this is designed for. Will it do that? I don't know. They're usually open source stuff, and they usually open that sort of stuff to everyone. So I don't know, probably. I think this thing plays ROMs, even though I don't play ROMs on it. I play cartridges. They're very clear about that here. Let me repeat that one more time. Analogue 3D does not play copyrighted ROM files. Okay, remember that. Number 2, and just as important, Analogue 3D is not designed using software emulation. It is designed using a specialty hardware chip called an FPGA, which operates on a transistor level. If you are unfamiliar with what FPGA is, you should go look that up, or maybe better yet, I'll do a video explaining what FPGA is. But basically what this is saying is, when you buy this system, it's not an emulator. It's not emulating the N64 console itself. It's actually playing it on hardware, which beat that drum all the time. Number 3, Analogue does not infringe on any copyrights or trademarks. That's important for them to note so they don't get sued by Nintendo. I'm sure some of you are wondering, oh, how are they getting around all that? You see, console, they don't have too long of a shelf life. That's why you're seeing reproductions of Game Boys, Nintendos, Super Nintendos, Genesis, a lot of those consoles, including now the N64, you can make, if you want to, you can make and sell this hardware. You just can't sell the software with it, which is why they're doing it this way. Number 4, all games are showcased to illustrate compatibility with the Analogue 3D. All trademarks and copyrights visualized are for compatibility and are the property of their respective owners. Number 5, Analogue does not operate utilizing BIOS files from any other entities. Analogue designs all of their hardware. I respect that. That's very cool. Number 6, Analogue 3D does not support Open FPGA. This is interesting, and I don't think that I had read this before, so I might have to go back on something I said earlier about them releasing Open FPGA to the public. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case here, unless I'm misreading this. Analogue 3D does not support Open FPGA, so maybe they're not going to allow people to dump other emulators on here or even run game ROMs from an SD card. I guess we'll see. I've seen lots of headlines, though, stating the Analogue 3D is going to run all your N64 games on an SD card. I am not seeing anything here that is even remotely referencing that sort of thing. In fact, this stuff that I'm reading now is just the opposite. So take that as you will. Number 7, all new 3D OS features are supported in Analogue 3D only. It is not supported on any past Analogue products. That should be obvious. Number 8, 8-bit do 64 controller is not included with the Analogue 3D. It's sold separately for $40. I already went over that. Number 9, resolution is 10x. The majority of games run at 320. Some games display in 640. That's important to understand. That's the actual resolution of the games, which is what they ran on an N64. So, number 10, Analogue 3D requires a 4K compatible display to use original display modes. So they're not joking. This thing is designed for a 4K display. You're not gonna plug in your old CRT TV to this thing. But you know what would be really cool? If a company out there wanted to start producing a little CRT television again. Just throwing that out there. Here's something important for streamers like myself. Number 11, Analogue 3D cannot use a capture card with original display modes enabled. It can use a capture card in 4K without original display modes. So if you want to stream this or you want to capture footage, you're not going to be able to do it using their special original display modes. You know, the ones that are supposed to emulate what a CRT television looks like. So keep that in mind. There's probably not going to be a very good way to really display what this console is capable of when it comes to their original display modes like CRT and those sorts of modes. And number 12, Analogue 3D supports 1080 output in addition to 4K. We strongly recommend playing in 4K for the experience. the Analogue 3D was created for. So that's really important as well. They recommend that you play this in 4K in order to get that full experience. Analogue here has really put a lot of time and effort into the Analogue 3D. I'd like to stress again, I am not affiliated with Analogue in any way. I've never even spoken with anybody at Analogue. Although, if you guys do want to talk, call me. I personally am really excited about this sort of stuff. I talk about it all the time with games preservation. I really think it's an important thing. Emulation has come a very, very long way. But when I see companies like Analogue and Mod Retro with the Chromatic doing this sort of stuff, it really warms my heart. And they're not wrong. The N64 was designed for multiplayer. This is the first true multiplayer experience. 4 controller ports on the front. I personally cannot wait to sit down with my kids when I get mine and play stuff like GoldenEye. I mean, and now that the cat is out of the bag with the Analogue 3D, the real question is, what are they working on next? You know, could this potentially be something we see in the future with like a PlayStation 1 or a PlayStation 2 or even an Xbox? Could we see a reproduced console that plays those original discs? The sad part is any console pretty much past that, this sort of thing isn't going to be capable of because of all the online restrictions and stuff that you need in order to play those games. So we're almost at the end of the line here, which is sort of sad to say. And that's why game preservation is so important. If you are at all curious about that Chromatic, you should check out this video right here. And don't forget to subscribe right here for future videos like this. Until then, enjoy the journey.